Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan Ennis. Ukraine War News Update, third part thereof for the 19th of July 2024. I have just done a video on my Atypical Philosopher channel, which is the original channel. That's where the ATP comes from. But a more philosophical video looking at Trump's assassination and the idea that it was a miracle of God that happened, that he survived, etc., etc. If you want to look into more of a philosophical topic or a topic with a more philosophical angle, then check out that video. It's not connected to the war in Ukraine, but I have just done that. Okay, I'm going to start with to be fair, quite a lot of this is going to be concerning the UK because Zelensky's been in the UK. There's been a meeting at Blenheim Palace where European leaders have been talking about European security, so on and so forth. In fact, this was the opening speech, I guess, or the opening remarks by Keir Starmer yesterday, and I'll play this to you.
It is my great pleasure to welcome you to Britain and to the splendour of Blenheim Palace. I hope you enjoyed the weather, the drive, and the architecture of this beautiful place. Thank you so much for being here. It is, of course, the birthplace of Winston Churchill, and we stand for the values that he embodies around the world. Liberty and democracy, yes, of course, but also defiance and resolve in their defence. And today, as a new storm gathers over our continent, we choose to meet it in that same spirit, and we choose to meet it together. And that is the choice of the government that I lead, now 2 weeks old. We want to work with all of you to reset relationships, rediscover our common interest, and renew the bonds of trust and friendship that brighten the fabric of European life.
Interesting that he's going down the closer cooperation with Europe, certainly in terms of security.
And the task is urgent because our security is on the line. Every day Ukraine fights to protect.
And I love the way he just humanly touches Zelensky as he mentions that. It's just little things like that. I just think that this means a lot to Zelensky, to Starmer, that there is a humanity to Starmer that underwrites our strategic positioning.
Every day Ukraine fights to protect not just the Ukrainian people,
it's important.
The European people, a continent where our belief in freedom, democracy and the rule of law was hard won and that wants to live in peace. So, President Zelensky, in your struggle to uphold those values, we salute you once again. Have no doubt we will stand with you for as long as it takes.
And that was Starmer yesterday at the Blenheim Palace meeting, and lots has come out about that. No doubt lots has happened under the bonnet. But we're going to go now to what's happened today. So Zelensky then went to 10 Downing Street to again meet Starmer and meet the cabinet. So all of the official secretaries in the UK government to give a speech there as another example of a close, warmth to these guys, and that's really good to see. Zelensky's like this with most leaders, but from a British point of view, I like to see something like this, which is, I think a reflection of how seriously Starmer is behind Ukraine, and there is no doubt that will continue. We'll talk about that in a second, that we are in this for the long haul, the UK, especially since Starmer's just been elected. So one of the great things at the moment is not only the UK support is strong and just as strong as it was, and possibly even stronger because Labour will want to differentiate themselves from the previous government. So it could be going even harder in support for Ukraine. But that is now hopefully baked in for 4 years from a UK point of view, whereas you look at the US at the moment and people are worrying. We have, No, here we have it. Don't know why that suddenly disappeared. Then we had Zelensky in 10 Downing Street speaking in a very privileged way to the cabinet there. I'm not going to play you all of this. It's almost 7 minutes of what you would imagine would be the typical sort of things he would say.
Here, Prime Minister, honorable cabinet members. It's very symbolic, really, and very important for me, for all Ukrainians, that we have such strong support and trust of the United Kingdom. And this is the first meeting of the British cabinet of this kind. Thank you so much. I truly hope that this beginning of the new British government's work will open up more shared opportunities for us, Ukraine and the UK.
And at the end here,
thank you so much. When you will have possibility to come to Ukraine, you will see that for all Ukrainians is a privilege, and we are very thankful to UK and to all of you, to all of your nation. Thank you again. And we can work on details of our agreements as possible, so that our people, Ukrainians and Britons, can feel the results as soon as possible. Thank you again. Thank you for this invitation with your strong team. Thank you. Slava Ukraini.
So good stuff there, and all the usual sort of kind of rhetoric you would expect in that speech. But as far as the details of what will happen as a result of these meetings, I'm sure it will all come out in the wash. Keir Starmer said, "I won't allow Russia's shadow fleet of oil tankers and the dirty money it generates to flow freely through European waters and put our security at risk. Ukraine is and always will be at the heart of my government's agenda." So again, rhetorically very strong in support. Andrew Tate here, nobody wants this. Why isn't the heart of your agenda the people of Britain? Andrew Tate is an absolute tool. And of course, he's only saying that, I presume, because he's being given a bit of a gift by the Russians for doing so. I think that's really good from Keir Starmer. And here we have Keir Starmer also. I think this is interesting. So from a UK point of view, this is very interesting positioning here. So this is at the European Summit yesterday as well, or a talk after it at Blenheim Palace.
So our first task here today is to confirm our steadfast support for Ukraine, to unite once again behind those values that we cherish, and to say we will face down aggression on this continent together. Because the threat from Russia reaches right across Europe. Many of us have seen attacks on our own democracy, people targeted on our streets, military planes entering our airspace, ships patrolling our coastlines, and in Moldova and the Western Balkans, the threat is obviously even more acute. So this is the moment for us all to do more. And I'm proud of Britain's role in maintaining European security through NATO, the Joint Expeditionary Force, and more. We stand together, we guard Europe's frontiers, and now we must find new, more ambitious ways of working together. But it's also time that we bring this resolve to another challenge facing our continent, the vile trade of people smuggling.
So it's really interesting that as a Labour government, they are keen to be seen to be strong on immigration, because they know if they give reform an inch, reform will take a mile. And they know there is this groundswell of political opinion on political sympathy for the kind of anti-immigration reform positioning. And therefore, Labour know, in fact, Tony Blair said this the other day, you've got to be strong on immigration. So it's interesting that yesterday there was a boat that turned some migrants coming across the channel, picked them up, I think, and took them back to France in an agreement with France. So there's a new agreement. Daily Mail was reporting all of this, although they did it in a typical Daily Mail way, but they couldn't quite give Keir Starmer enough kudos for doing exactly what they've been asking for ages. So this is a resetting of a relationship with Europe, resetting a relationship with France, and working together with France in order to sort out the migrant and the boat problem. Here, concentrating on people smuggling, probably taking the easier element of immigration to have a go at, which is the people smuggling, rather than actually solving the overarching issues that are causing people to try to leave the countries they are in: foreign policy, warfare, climate change, etc., etc. Nonetheless, it's interesting to see that positioning there. But anyway, going back to today, because that again was yesterday, Prime Minister Keir Starmer says next that the UK plans to double aid to Ukraine. I bet if I refresh this will have disappeared now, or it should have done, because this is an incorrect reading of, I think, the language. No, it's still there. So I think this isn't doubling aid to Ukraine. We are not planning on doubling aid to Ukraine. I think this is a reading of Keir Starmer saying that the UK will double down on backing for Ukraine. That's not doubling aid. It's a wholly different thing. And to double down on something it's English idiom to say that, we're going to be extra hard about this. We're going to be even more committed to this. But it's not a kind of quantitative statement about doubling any aid to Ukraine. So I think that's been misinterpreted by a lot of people. So if you read that anywhere, just my take is that they've got that wrong, because that would be huge. Yeah, we're going to give you this much aid. We're already emptied our cupboards. We're going to double the amount of aid we're giving you. It would be nice, but ain't going to happen. Keir Starmer welcomed the Ukrainian president to Downing Street, calling the visit a real piece of history. Ukrainian president was greeted at the UK cabinet with a standing ovation as he became the first foreign minister to address a cabinet in person since 1997. Starmer said the UK will double down on backing for Ukraine and confirmed he had accepted this morning an invitation to visit Ukraine again in the future. Ukrainian President Zelensky asked Keir Starmer to show your leadership and help with Ukraine's long-range capability. Now that's important. And we'll look at that in more detail in a second. In his address to UK Cabinet, Zelensky said if the restriction on Western weapons is lifted, it would help Kyiv to strengthen its defence and secure its frontline positions. He said it is possible to destroy areas in Russia where weapons are being concentrated on long-range capability. The president said, quote, "We are still missing the main answer to this question," and told the Prime Minister, "I ask you to show your leadership on the issue." Really putting the ball in Starmer's court, and rightly so. But prior to that meeting, an article did come out, and we'll look at this in a second, saying Britain will not help Ukraine hit targets in Russia, the Defence Secretary said. Although, devil's in the detail here, what do you mean by help? So John Healey, our Defence Secretary, was speaking as before Zelensky was due to address a cabinet meeting in Downing Street. Healey did not rule out accepting the Ukrainian president's request to use British-made missiles against Russian territory, but added that Britain would not be involved in any such attacks. So this allows our missiles to still be used. It's not ruling that out, although there doesn't seem to be a ruling on it. Our missiles may well be used, but we are not going to help you do that. Well, yeah, fair enough. I'm sure the Ukrainians be like, yeah, sure. I presume that means in terms of our planes aren't going to be taking off, our people aren't going to be fitting the missiles, and we won't be giving you the intelligence to do so. But it will give you the missiles, you do the rest. Appears to be still on the cards. Now, this one's an interesting one. The UK will provide military funding for Ukraine, quote, for every year for the rest of the decade, according to, again, John Healey, Defence Secretary, told Times Radio. If we make the starting point that the defence of the UK starts in Ukraine, and if Putin wins in Ukraine, he will not stop there, then we must stand with Ukraine. We're determined to do that. This is a really good way of seeing it, and how everyone should see it, which is that our money is best spent on Ukraine because that is the defence of the UK, or that is the defence of Poland, or the US. In terms of your kind of Cold War setup, you are spending money, in this case in another country, in order to defend your interests, to defend your country. But this is the John Healey article. So he told BBC 4's Today programme, we're providing weapons for Ukraine for their defence of their sovereign country, and that does not preclude them hitting targets in Russia. But that must be done by the Ukrainians. It must be done within the parameters and the bounds of international humanitarian law. Keir Starmer previously indicated Ukraine would be able to use Storm Shadows missiles against targets in Russia, but only for defensive purposes. The Prime Minister said last week, quote, "It is for defensive purposes, but it is for Ukraine to decide how to deploy it for those defensive purposes." And that was then seen as being given permission for Ukraine to use Storm Shadows against, say, air bases in Russia. But then the British MOD came out and clarified, we're not too sure about that. And now I'm left thinking, well, I don't still quite know what the situation is. As far as I'm concerned, that is tacit permission for Ukraine to use those missiles. I don't think they're the right missiles to use against air bases, but nonetheless, you could use them against air bases. Now, or at least not against the the aircraft on the air bases. You can maybe use that to strike at the air traffic control tower, so on and so forth. But I don't know whether the US still has a horse in that race and has some say over how Ukraine use our missiles. But anyway, talk is that, he wants the UK to show leadership, particularly on those long-range strikes into Russia. I'm sure there's going to be more on that going forward. Now, Zelensky's also met with King Charles III, who is a strong supporter of Ukraine. We just have we're lucky in the UK. I don't know if it's lucky, if it's luck. We're in a good position whereby we have strong bipartisan support for Ukraine. We're very much in support throughout the population of Ukraine, and the monarchy, for what it's worth, supports Ukraine as well. But it's interesting that you heard earlier Keir Starmer talk about how we are already seeing elements of the war in Ukraine spill over into our lives on our streets. He was talking from a European point of view, where we've had fires burning and assassination attempts and all sorts of stuff going on, as well as cyber warfare attacking hospitals and so on and so forth. And it's really interesting that the UK has now just commissioned a new defence strategy report to see, look, what are we doing with our armed forces? And there have been other really big conferences taking place in the UK, not just Blenheim Palace and the cabinet meeting, but actually there have been the Chief of the Air Staff's Global Air and Space Chiefs Conference 2024. I know Dom Nichols from the Daily Telegraph's Ukraine the Latest podcast was at this and very interested in the sort of things that have been said. This is just a minute 22 from one of our guys. I know it's UK based as well, but I think you can draw an understanding that everyone is now seeing warfare in terms of a hybrid warfare approach.
Our air, land and sea naval capabilities are all dependent on our ability to work together in space and in cyber. Satellites and cyber communications are intrinsic components of our command and control, our secure comms, our ISR and PNT capabilities, and our missile defence. Yet for far too long, the Ministry of Defence and government strategies have not given enough value to space and cyber that they should have. And neither have they given enough value to those people who work in them either. If we're to get Britain's fighting forces fit to deter our adversaries and defeat them if necessary, we must be ready for the profound step changes in warfare that we are seeing in our increasingly volatile and contested world. We need to be a truly integrated force equipped for all-domain warfare. Multi-domain integration is not enough. I see MDI as a journey that takes us to a destination. That destination is all-domain warfare, where to win, we control space, cyber, electronic spectrums, as well as air, land and sea in a single joined-up approach. And that is the change that we're determined to bring to defence, to support those people in defence who are already working on that.
I find that interesting because they're talking about integration of these different domains, but also, for me, there's the idea that you have to have international integration as well. And that's why it's important for the UK to seek a closer cooperation with Europe, because you cannot combat cyber attacks, I think, from your own country alone. Information warfare and cyber warfare is something that happens across borders, and borders are meaningless in the virtual spaces. we need to make sure that we in the UK, but we as a Western world standing up for the rules-based democratic world order, need to be working very closely together against common enemies of cyber. I'd say cyber terrorists or nation states committing cyber warfare, but also information warfare and disinformation. That requires that kind of integration. Anyway, going back to Zelensky and talking about how Trump could solve this in 24 hours, solve the war in 24 hours. He said, "We will never go for it and no one in the world will force us to do it," says Zelensky said about Trump's idea of ending the war in 24 hours, if the main point is the loss of territories. And that is, I think, what's generally accepted by Trump. He's pretty much said that. We've had Kellogg and Flights and these people developing these plans for a potential Trump administration, seeming to indicate that, the way you solve this is by stopping aid to Ukraine to force them to the table, then force them to concede territory. And Ukraine are like, that's not your decision to make. But then the argument back would be, but it's our decision to give you weapons. And if you don't do that, we won't give you weapons. But of course, that is still enforcing a foreign ideology or an idea of how this thing should end on the people whose country it is. So I'm, as you know, I'm not a big fan of Trump, but I'm not a big fan of that kind of forced negotiation scenario. And during the European Political Community Summit in Blenheim Palace, Zelensky met with Spanish Prime Minister. He's met with a lot of people, but Pedro Sanchez met with Zelensky as well. Spain's unwavering support for Ukraine and recent decisions to provide defence assistance was discussed. They discussed a schedule for arms delivery and further defence support, implementation of decisions from the first Global Peace Summit, and upcoming thematic conferences on the peace formula points. You've had Denmark joining the boycott of EU Council meetings during Hungary's presidency. So earlier, 6 countries have announced that they would not send their ministers to the meetings organised by Hungary during its presidency. This is a really big thing, actually. Hungary's saying, right, we're in charge. We kind of got this rotating presidency for 6 months. We are going to have these meetings here in Budapest and blah, blah, blah. We'll have all these meetings. And then a bunch of countries are going, you guys suck, we're not coming to your meeting, and actually we're going to hold alternative meetings, and then more countries going along with that. And actually some of those, I think France and Germany being the main people involved in that repudiation of the Hungarian presidency, I think. And Serbia, just down the road, where there are all sorts of things boiling over. And in fact, Zelensky's met with Vučić, Serbian president, at Blenheim Palace as well. That would have been an interesting meeting to be a fly on the wall in. Serbia and Russia have had a meeting on cooperation in security. Wait until some naive folks in Washington tell you, don't worry, it's just for domestic audience. Belgrade is dancing to the American tune. That is not really the case. Ivana Stradner, very much a believer that things are very volatile in the Balkans and they are firmly under the sphere of influence, under the influence of Russia. Just to let you know that breaking news, Evan Gershkovich, the Wall Street Journal journalist who has been wrongfully convicted, has now been sentenced to 16 years in a Russian prison. So that is a real challenge for the Americans to try and sort out. Now, going to America, we have had a couple of big developments. The first one involves Biden. There is now general acceptance that he's going to step down by the end of this weekend, it appears. Axios saying here that Biden will be forced to withdraw from the presidential race as early as this weekend. Quote, top leaders in his party, his friends and key donors believe he can't win, can't change the public perception of his age, and can't secure a majority in Congress. Now, I know some of you, and I've been 60-40, I think he should step down, but I've got to a point where he actually, it doesn't matter what you guys have as an argument against him stepping down from a kind of more abstract point of view. Practically, he can no longer run. And the reason why he can't run, and this is what a lot of people are not realizing, there are 2 reasons he practically cannot run now. One is that the donors have started freezing their money and are stopping donating. And in fact, it's got really bad. Like, they are missing a load of money. So if you don't have the money, like literally, you cannot campaign in the swing states. And actually, money is now being funneled to people down tickets. So in those swing states, the people, so the big funders are now realizing this, are not funding Biden, but are funding, say, the senatorial, the congressional races down the ticket, which means that they are worried that the Democrats now will lose that they're looking at so they should take the House of Representatives. The Senate is on a knife edge, but if they lose any senator, that's it. They've got to retain all their senators, and then some funky things have to go on because of the nature of the people who are up. Only a third of senators are up at any given election, and a third that are up now are not in favour of the Democrats maintaining control of the Senate. So it's on a knife edge, and they're looking like, instead of winning the House of Representatives, polling's looking dodgy for that. So what the donors are doing are funneling money into lawmakers down ticket and their campaigns to make sure that the Senate and the House of Representatives are either competitive or remain under control of the Democrats, and not giving money to Biden, which means that then if Biden is going to campaign, he's got no money to campaign on. Right? You aren't going to be able to fund the grassroots movements and the offices opening in these swing states. And if he loses the swing states, he's done. Right? So in other words, Biden can't win without the donors. But here's the big thing that many people are missing. There have been a number of people who have now openly come out and said that Biden should go. And in order to campaign, if Biden remains in, he's going to be very awkward going to these places. Some of these places are the ones they have to win. And if you're going to some of these swing states and you've got lawmakers who have said, I don't support you, essentially, I think you need to be replaced, then campaigning in those super important places is now, not only is the money not going to the Biden campaign, but it's also very difficult to campaign with these people who have already rejected you. And so it's got to this point that so many people have said that actually his campaign is poisoned, to the point where I think his team have essentially realized that it's just not going to work. And it's stuff like this that you need to pay attention to.
The Democratic base right now is just entirely lacking for intensity. I mean, when I talk with Democrat elected officials in the battleground states, they tell me the same story over and over and over again. They can't find anybody to come out and volunteer for them to do the sort of work that's necessary in a field operation, because there's just no enthusiasm. I mean, we hear all the time about the cliche enthusiasm gap in politics. I've never seen an enthusiasm gap like the one we're witnessing in the summer of this election year. I've heard horror stories from people on the ground in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, in Arizona about just striking out time and time again as local Democratic Party chapters, county chapters, have tried to get people to come in and phone bank, to get mail going, to knock on doors. They can't do it. They can't find people. The Democrats.
So you can have all these great arguments. You could go to Alan Lichtman's 13 Keys and whatnot and say, X, Y, and Z. But if you've got no volunteers and you've got no money, and the people that you're campaigning with have rejected you, it's actually just impossible for Biden to run. It is just practically impossible. So it's gone beyond whether you think he's got a greater chance of winning or not than another person. We're beyond that now. It doesn't matter whether he's got a greater chance or not. It's irrelevant. He basically can't run. And if he stays in, that is absolute suicide, because unfortunately, practically for him, everything is against him. And so you're now starting to see widespread reporting concerning this, all sorts of stuff coming out all the time. So here, Biden's family is now reportedly discussing possible exit plan, although a top aide has said he's going to stay. But remember, he'll be in 100% until he's not in. Another senator has come out and called on him. So that's a third senator. Remember, there's only 50, and these are the big ones. 4 more House Democrats have come out. This is just now since I've started recording this. So you've got another senator, 4 more House Democrats, and you will now get permission for people to come out. And what I've been hearing previously from people who know everyone behind the scenes is that everyone they've spoken to behind the scenes, like all the senators and the representatives, have been saying Biden needs to go, but they're not willing to come out and say it publicly. Now that the floodgate is opened, I think you'll start to see this more and more. And so I just think that is game over for Biden. Interestingly, I watched, because that's how cool I am, I watched a campaign speech by Kamala Harris last night in North Carolina, and it was freaking brilliant. And I know lots of people are like, yeah, not a fan of her. She's never going to win, never going to win. She gave an absolutely barnstorming presidential speech last night. And I listened to the whole thing. And it was like, man, if she can do that day in, day out, I was energized just listening to it, and I've heard lots of other people likewise. It's back on then. And what's really interesting, so now we're going to go and look a little bit at the Republican National Congress. We're going to leave this bit on China till the end, I think. So when we go back to the Republican National Committee conference, this should have been an absolute home run, right? The Democrats are all over the shop. There's not infighting like that. There's just chaos because most people want to change, but then some people say you can't change, don't get off a horse in the middle of crossing a river, etc., etc. But the horse is kind of drowning. So this should have been an absolute home run of a conference, but by all accounts, the conference was a bit of a damp squib, right? And I've seen a lot of stuff on it, and there have been some just outright lies, load of normal kind of stuff, but it's been a bit like meh for a number of reasons, and it should have been an absolute home run. Now, they were going on this kind of unity ticket, and as a result, I think the speech, so Trump had an hour and a half speech, was way too long, and it was by all accounts absolutely boring and just not very good. So what you've got here is essentially a presidential candidate, who is really beatable. Like, if the Democrats had their shit together, this should be like, Trump is so divisive that, yeah, lots of people really love him, but lots of people really hate him. And if you had a really good thing to stand for here, and that hatred of Trump, then you've just got a winning ticket. Now, the Republicans have gone into the RNC and have chosen Vance because they're supremely confident. Like, if you weren't confident of winning, you wouldn't have chosen Vance because he brings nothing to the ticket. You would say, right, strategically, we want to get Latino voters and Reagan Republicans, so we're going to get Marco Rubio, right? And he's very different from Trump. And so therefore you cover more bases. What they did is went Trump 2.0 and went Vance, really narrow. And then you'd only do that if you think you've got this in the bag. And listening to some analysts who have been in the conference speaking to people, they say the confidence here is just like, yeah, they just think they've got this sewn up. But interestingly, the actual national polling is within the margin of error still. So although everyone's talking about the Democrats have done and Biden's had it, actually when you look at the polls, they're not that bad for the Democrats, and they're not that good for the Republicans. Now, the trend lines are bad, and then they're not where they need to be in certain swing states. And so the Democrats have got a lot of work to do. And I don't think Biden's probably in the right place to do it, particularly now, as you've heard. But actually, the Republicans are not in a place that they think they're in, it appears. Anyway, the RNC, you get a lot like this, like Kremlin propaganda calls Russian invasion the Ukraine war. It's interesting. I hadn't thought about this. Trump will end the Ukraine war rather than Trump will end the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But that, you look at that, and if you didn't understand anything about the Ukraine war, you would think that Ukraine might be at fault there. I love what Jake Bro did here. So there, I fixed Trump's stupid signs at the GOP convention. Trump will end Ukraine. Trump will end Ukraine. It's not Trump will end the Ukraine war. He will just end Ukraine. So that's the thought of many. Interesting that at the convention as well, good reminder that Trump and his millions of voters don't give a crap about the Putin's puppet epithets that are actually think having their own strongman leader is cool. So the RNC displays an image of Trump next to Russian President Putin on a big screen above the convention stage. I guess this is the idea. He's trying to sell to the people that I am presidential enough and serious enough to be doing diplomatic work with Putin. But those optics are freaking bad. But actually, those optics will work with some of those people in that conference theatre. I just think that tells you all you need to know about his positioning there. And then he did all the weird stuff about kissing Comparatori's helmet, so to speak, the firefighter who died as a result of him turning his head or similar. You know, the missing, if it's a miracle that Trump was saved, then that miracle ended in the death of someone else and the injury of two other people. So you got to remember that. This is what I did my philosophical video on. Don't give me the God saved my life, because actually he's killed that person. He could have saved both of you, but that person died. So that's a really bad bit of theology if you're going to use that. But he's really like, I cringed big time. Anyway, on the speech is interesting. So Pod Save America are an avowedly Obama Democrat type. Actually, they've gone slightly more progressive than that even these days, but they are a Democrat podcast. But the interesting thing about these guys is they are all speech writers for Obama. So they know how to literally how to narratively construct speeches and what you need to put in each part of the speech in order to make it work. And they looked at Trump's speech and they were like, holy crap, this is one of the worst speeches ever. It was just an absolute shambles. And their analysis of that RNC speech is very interesting. Just a little bit of a synopsis here.
I mean, there has been all this talk, and some of it warranted, about how much better this version of the Trump campaign has been, and how much, and I swear I'm doing this on a curve, but how much more disciplined Trump has been throughout this. Like, he doesn't want to go to prison, right? And it's either he wins, he doesn't go to prison, or he loses and goes to prison. And so he has been more focused than in previous efforts. But this speech was fucking insane. Just like the content is insane. It makes no logical sense. But the convention speech itself is the easiest layup in American politics. All the networks agree. We're just going to let you speak for an hour directly to tens of millions of Americans. Just say whatever you want, deliver your message. Here is free propaganda. And he took that and he just could not do it. It made no sense. He had no message. He was all over the map. Most people went to bed.
The convention, the people who produced the convention actually did do a good job of just
the rest of the convention
spewing propaganda.
The rest of the convention was incredibly disciplined. They made even the craziest of MAGA freaks kind of toe some sort of line. There was no discussion of the 2020 election throughout 4/5 days of this convention. Now did all of this, and then Donald Trump gets up there in his moment and thinks he's at a rally somewhere in like rural Pennsylvania.
It was like a long Rotary Club.
It was crazy. He was honestly doing like open mic night at Mar-a-Lago. It was insane.
It was heartening actually, and it was a reminder that this, I know we've been in a very hard debate about fears that Democrats have about losing, but this is a reminder about how beatable this guy is. And
so on and so forth. And they take apart his speech, and it's just very boring. It went on for an hour and a half, and that's why they talk about 5 days. It literally went over midnight. But anyway, so those are the two things happening in American politics, where just to give you those from around the world who might want a bit of a synopsis, is that you're now at a point where for Ukraine, I gave an interview to Stephen Bendow earlier today, and he, as a Norwegian, and we had a little bit of a chat about how we view the future of Ukraine being somewhat linked to the future of the US in terms of the presidential debate. It is that important. And you've got a situation now where you will probably have a Biden alternative by the end of the weekend, or maybe a journey towards Biden alternative. And you have a Trump campaign that is possibly poisoned by Project 2025. You've got someone who's maybe overconfident about their ability to win, but if someone now replaces Biden, then it might be, oh my goodness. And you've got a proper fight on your hands, potentially. And you've got, if it's Kamala Harris, you've got someone who can give rip-roaring speeches when she needs to, as she's doing at the moment. Now, in the past, she's been a bit hit and miss. But from what I've seen recently, on the last month, her speeches on reproductive rights, for example, have been exceptionally strong. And those are going to be getting back to campaigning on the stuff that is going to change people's opinion in these swing states. So abortion is going to be back on the agenda. It's going to be talking about all the proper policy things that should be discussed. I don't think it's going to be talking about Ukraine, particularly. That might feature a little bit, but I don't think that's what you're going to go to your middle America to try and convince as a vote winner. So there'll be, I think, if Biden gets replaced, it will be a re-energized campaign. You'll start getting volunteers coming back. You'll get donors coming back because people are crapping themselves, but they don't want to pour money into something that is dead cert going to lose. from their perception. So you'll get donors coming back, and it suddenly becomes a proper campaign. If you get someone like Josh Shapiro on a ticket, then that's a really strong, I think, pairing, where he is from one of the swing states, so he will give her something extra on a ticket. I think there are loads of interesting options there, and then Ukraine might have some hope going forward. Now, if it goes Pete Tong, if it goes all wrong with the presidential election, then Ukraine are going to have to rely on Europe and a stability in Europe. Now, luckily, Ursula von der Leyen is there for another 5 years. We've got the European elections have taken place, and although there was a bit of issue from the right wing, it seems to be broadly holding, and we can expect Ukraine to be supported by Europe and the UK going forward. So even if America do drop by the wayside, it depends how fragile the Russian armed army is and their war machine. And if Ukraine can hold out for another year, if the US, if it's looking like Trump's going to win, and then Biden decides to spank the rest of that money that has been put aside for Ukraine and gets a load of kit to Ukraine before November, or at least before January, then that could lay up Ukraine to be in a more successful position going forward, knowing that they've got a ramped up industrial sector in Europe and the UK, and maybe even places like South Korea and Australia and Japan. You've got help coming in. You can still see a pathway for Ukrainian victory, even despite Trump winning. But I still think it would be much easier for Ukraine with a non-Trump victory. And just finally, because remember, there's some of the stuff coming out the RNC, that Republican convention has been concerning China, and it's been very concerning for people who are supportive of Taiwan, since Trump came out and said, Taiwan nick all our microchip industry, so not really bothered type thing. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller has responded to Donald Trump's anti-Taiwan rhetoric and suggestion that he won't defend Taiwan if attacked by China. Quote, Taiwan has been paying for its own defense. So this idea that China, a bit like Ukraine, is just being like cap in hand to the US, and the US has been sorting out Taiwan. Taiwan has been paying for its own defense. Taiwan has been purchasing military equipment from the United States to the tune of billions of dollars. And the military equipment that they have purchased supports American manufacturing, supports American industry, supports American technology. Exactly the same kind of arguments for Ukraine, but actually Ukraine has been given military aid packages in a way that Taiwan hasn't to the amount that Ukraine has, and it is a lot more to do with Taiwan just buying that stuff for a long time off the US. So, if you want to hang Taiwan out to dry, then say goodbye to a load more arms deals, and you will get pressure from those companies within the US if that's your approach. So anyway, hopefully that was of use. I know I've been concentrating a lot more on the UK today because of my UK bias, but actually people have been meeting there. Well, I've got paint on my hands. Although people have been, a lot of nations have been meeting in the UK, so I think that's really important. But also, we must remember the importance of the American election. That's why I keep talking about it, because it will be so important for Ukraine going forward. Anyway, take care, guys. Speak soon. Toodle pips.